Hey guys, what you're looking at right here is a piece of truck spring that I've just been beating on for a year. Once in a while I'll get bored and I'll beat on it a little bit and then I'll put it away because it's large and I don't have anything like a power hammer. I'm just hitting it by hand. So what you're seeing right here is me setting up to beat on this thing probably a year and a half prior to editing this video. See that Wilton vise there? I actually restored it in a later video and I'll link it up top. I know this setup looks super primitive. This is prior to me having an anvil or most of the tongs or hammers that I have currently. This right here is at 8X. Moving this 5160 is really exhausting work. Excuse me boys, I'm out of breath. And my goal was that it would eventually turn into some sort of top tool, and I've decided that it's going to turn into a top cut tool. So this end will be a sharpened chiseled edge, and there'll be a handle in here, and this will be the striking end. Lots of work to do from where it is to get there. Lots of grinding to do. There's a fish mouth right here that I've got to take care of. And what I'm pointing with is an H13 drift that I just finished making to make this tool with. And maybe in another video I'll do my process for heat treating H13 and how I make a drift. Maybe that'll be what I do, is I'll make a drift and describe my heat treat process. I think it's a good process. It works for me, and nothing has blown up and killed me yet. Okay, just for perspective, the front of the camera is about 5 foot away from the anvil face at this point, and look at how the shock wave from that hammer strike moves the front of the camera, and look at how the anvil moves also with those hits. That's pretty impressive to me. That's an 8-pound hammer, so definitely wear your safety glasses when you're doing this stuff. So now I've switched to the 4.4 pound pitting house. I swung that 8-pounder till I was at the point of exhaustion. I just could not go anymore with it. At this point, I'm probably an hour into beating on this thing, and I've only thinned it out about 1/4 of an inch there. Here's a shot of my progress up to this point. It may not look like I've done a whole lot, but it's actually down to just clean up and cut off from the bar and then ready to be handled by tongs. So this cutoff tool you're seeing here is actually the first blacksmithing tool I ever made. It's actually just a high carbon railroad spike that's just kind of turned into a cutoff knife. It doesn't look like much, but it's actually pretty effective, and you get a lot of control being that close to the work. Downside is hot. In a previous shot, you may have noticed tongs sitting on the anvil while I was working. The reason those tongs were there is because while I was working on this piece and hammering it out, I was actually making this hold fast kind of in between heats. It's ugly as sin, made out of rebar, but as you can see, it sure does hold really well.
I'd say that hold down's working. That's a 4-pound hammer.
Yeah, I was pretty excited about it.
People will see me wearing gloves while forging. I'm using a propane forge, and it's like a fire-breathing dragon. You saw me holding an 8-pound hammer and swinging it to the point of exhaustion, and I never lost grip once. I think more important than what you wear on your hands, because hands sweat, gloves don't. I think more important than whether or not you wear gloves is what you do to your handles. And this handle's just been had the factory varnish on it, and I just burned it, and that was it. And it leaves it kind of rough, And when it smooths in almost a tacky way. I actually do that to all my handles, whether they're painted or not, and I just like that feel.
It was a lot of work to get here, but this is actually my last heat on the part before I take it to grind.
At this point, I've got the piece in the forge. It is dull orange and the forge is off and it's just going to cool in there. So once I get it annealed, I'm going to drill a hole in it. Now I know that's cheating, but I don't care.
At this point, grinding has basically two goals. One, to kind of square up the part, and two, to get rid of that cold shut that's right down the middle of the sides. Notice my belt color change. What's going on is I've got 2 or 3 belts laying around that had just a little bit of life left in them, and I'm going ahead and burning them out on this roughing grinding session. Here I've switched to a brand new 24 grit from Benchmark Abrasives, so you can see the difference in the amount of sparks I'm making. It's pretty substantial what a brand new belt can do for you. Alright, at this point, if it looks like I've gotten after this thing with an angle grinder, it's because I have. That cold shut was just so deep and so involved, I just couldn't make it through with the belt. I mean, I could, but it'd have been 2 or 3 belts before I got there.
Okay, well, we've got the hole drilled in it to kind of be a pilot for the drift. Like I say, the reason for this hole being drilled is so that the drift has a path of least resistance to keep itself straight in the head, and because it makes it easier on me. So we're going to drift that hole, and then we will clean up. I've got a little bend there. It may be subtle to you, but it's curved here. This needs to bend just a couple degrees straight. Yeah, and then we're ready to finish grind it, or heat treat it and finish grind it. So let's get it done.
My point with the file in the previous shot was to show you that despite what anybody may say, you can actually differentially temper or draw a temper in H13. It does take a little bit of finesse and a little bit of attentiveness, but it's not that hard to do. So here I'm just working this small drift through, basically making room for the hammer eye drift. My anvil has an upsetting block, which is down on the side, and that would have been a much more reasonable place for me to initiate this drift. But it's kind of difficult to film in that area, so I did it up here for the benefit of the video. You'll notice that one of the cheeks is spreading out more readily than the other, and what that'll do is it'll cause the piece to curve. In this shot here, you see how one side's dull orange and one side's still pretty bright. That dull piece is what's spreading over, and you can see here that it's curved at this point. So what you'll see me do is hammer the drift in and then beat on the thicker cheek to thin it out, sort of using the drift as a fuller. This is the second to last heat, and at this point I'm done shaping the eye. It's all about just straightening up the part and getting it ready for heat treat. And here it is, finished forging and ready for heat treat. I'm quenching in used motor oil. That is not the safest thing to quench in. I am wearing a P100 mask and I'm in a super well ventilated shop. What I just showed you right there is that the first tempering cycle happened by virtue of the residual heat in the part. In other words, the residual heat in the core of the thicker part softened the exterior of that thicker part so that the striking end is softer and the cutting end is still quite hard. Here what I'm doing is just an old-fashioned temper. I'm just drawing that temper ever so slowly through the part. And my goal is to get a really good temper on those cheeks. They are thinner, so they did not have that thick core to cause them to temper on their own. A secondary goal while doing this is to get the tip between 350 and 400, but not more than 400. I want it tough, but not soft. It got to about 368 and the heat was continuing to rise, so I took a quick couple dips in the water to just arrest the temper.
That's probably good enough.
Here you'll see me start to work on the tip. When I got into grinding, I decided that a single beveled edge was the way to go, so that way I could have a nice straight cut on one side. I figure that'll come in handy at some point. I don't know what y'all think, but I am sure proud of that bevel. To me, that looks really, really nice, really, really straight, and really, really crisp. Now I'm switching to conditioning belts. I've never actually used these before, so I guess we'll see how they work out. Start with the coarse belt, and then you move to the medium grit belt, and then you finish off with the fine belt. I'm taking nice full-length passes right here because it leaves a nice straight grain that runs from beginning to end all the way through the tool. I just think that looks really, really nice. I wouldn't normally spend this much time polishing on a struck end, but it's YouTube, you gotta make it pretty. To clean up the eye, I start with a worn-out wire wheel just to get rid of the scale. That scale's really hard on anything abrasive or any type of carbide burr, and getting it out of the way really does help. Now I switch to a little grinding point, and it does a pretty decent job of getting me started. Eventually I'll switch to a burr and then back to another grinding point to get that eye right where I want it. And here I'm done with the inside of the eye, and I'm just breaking those edges so that they aren't sharp and don't dig into the handle. I decided I wanted to remove that tooling mark you see there. And again, since this is my first time using these Scotch-Brite belts, I figured I'd take you along on kind of a step-by-step journey of it disappearing. And one final cleanup to the whole thing, and we'll oil it up and get ready to put a handle on the thing. And to protect it, I'm using anhydrous lanolin with a little bit of automatic transmission fluid mixed in. So in my goodie pile here, I've got some of these like 1.5 by 1.5 cedar squares that came from my pergola build. And I'm pretty sure cedar's a terrible wood for a hammer, but this isn't exactly a hammer. It's a struck top tool. I think this will be okay to make a handle. So anyhow, I'll use this and see what happens. I'll get that knot out of it and see what we end up with. So I do not particularly enjoy woodworking. I just have sort of this mindset of get it done towards wood, where in metalworking I really want to get better and better and better all the time. I am trying to work on that attitude, and that's actually why I'm making this handle myself. Normally I just buy handles at the hardware store and put them on stuff, but I decided I'd make my own handle just to work on my wood skills a little bit. This doesn't look like much, but it actually makes for a really good dust collector. Right here I'm holding the handle in a blacksmith's leg vise. I'm actually, at the time of editing this video, in the process of restoring that vise. So if that interests you, be sure and subscribe so when I release it you can be notified of that. Kind of a side-by-side comparison from where we started and where we ended up. And this right here is just boiled linseed oil. So we started with this spring and this cedar piece and ended up with this cutting tool and this handle. I'm super happy with how it turned out at this point. The cutting edge is nice and straight, and the struck end is real nicely ground. That grind on that struck end won't matter much. A couple hits with a big hammer and it'll be tore up, but that's the same technique you would use to work on a hammer face. And that was the reason I spent so much time on it, was to be able to hone that skill. Now it's missing a retaining nail, and since we have a cut tool, I figured we'll use it to make one. So we'll use this little piece of scrap, And what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to make the first cut with this tool. The one-sided bevel does a very nice job of leaving one side of the cut fairly square, and you can see that there in the picture. Now I'm taking my time with this cut because it's a new tool and I'm kind of being ginger with it. Stuff like this is way easier to straighten over the horn, but I didn't feel like moving the camera and setting up another shot, so here we are. So my thinking here is that if I put the straight cut edge towards the little piece, it won't fly as far across the room. And I turned out to be correct. It basically just fell right off the edge of the anvil. And I made a little mark there in that first pass, and then here I am cutting it off. And one more hit. Oops. One more. Never mind. One more. There it is. And here's some close-ups of the edge after that little cut. Nice and clean still. I can sharpen this thing up to about right here before I run into where it's tempered and need to think about doing something different. So this should last me a long time, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you'll consider subscribing. Thanks.